Hi everyone, welcome to GoLean6Sigma.com's webinar. Thanks for spending some quality time with us. We've got over 550 people registered for this webinar, and I'm very excited about it because I think that you're going to really enjoy this webinar, and we are really excited that you're joining us today. So Lean and Six Sigma are the go-to improvement methods used by leading organizations all over the world to minimize costs and maximize profits and develop better teams, all while creating happier customers. So every month we craft webinars just for you, and this particular topic was on the high request list of covering. So we're really excited to bring this to you. And we really are looking to simplify concepts and tools of Lean Six Sigma so that you can understand and apply them more easily and be more successful. So today's webinar is titled, as you can see, How to Set Up and Run Hypothesis Tests. And I'm Tracy O'Rourke. I'm Managing Partner at GoLean6Sigma.com. And today's presenter is also a Managing Partner and Executive Advisor at GoLean6Sigma.com, Elizabeth Swan. How are you, Elizabeth?
I'm good, Tracy. How are you?
I'm good. So, Elizabeth has a lot of experience. She's been doing this for over 25 years. She's a master black belt, a consultant, a coach, a trainer. She has helped many organizations like Amazon, Charles Schwab, Target, Volvo, Alberta Health Services, Starwood. Man, you must be tired, Elizabeth, because you're helping
making me
a lot of people. And guess what? They love her. They always want to work with her. And what's really nice about Elizabeth that you might not know is, well, she does live on Cape Cod, and that's a really nice place to live with her husband and her cat. But she also knows how to ride a unicycle since she was 10 years old. Tell us a little bit about that, Elizabeth.
I learned it from a neighborhood friend, and we all used to unicycle when we were little kids. I didn't think about it until my husband decided he needed to learn how to ride a unicycle to be better at mountain biking. And I thought, I wonder if I could still do it. And I can.
Wonderful.
I don't use it on the job generally, but I can do it.
That's great. Okay, a few housekeeping notes before we begin. So first of all, everyone will be in listen-only mode. We've got, as we said, a lot of people on this webinar, so we want to make sure that people can hear very well. At the end of the presentation, we're going to have a question and answer session, but please feel free to ask any questions at any time during the webinar, and we can refer to them at the end of the webinar as well. So we'll also ask you to participate in some polls. And if we don't answer all of your questions during the webinar, we'll be sure to post answers as well as share the recording of this webinar on our website at GoLean6Sigma.com. So I will say one more time, because we get this a lot. You will be getting the slides for this presentation. They will be available on our website after. We probably get 5 or 6 comments. Can I have the slides? Can I have the slides? So yes, you will get the slides. So I'd love it if you could join us in our first activity today, and that is to tell us where you're from. So in the Ask a Question session, please type in where you're joining us from today.
What do you say?
All right, I got Hobbs, New Mexico, Eugene, Oregon, Cheshire, Connecticut, Columbia, Auburn, California, Clearwater, Florida, Houston, Texas, Covina, California, South Carolina, St. Louis, Missouri, Kingston, Jamaica, Scotland, UK.
All right.
We have some folks from Norway, Vancouver, British Columbia, Hawaii, Orange County, California, Italy, Philippines, Rapid City, South Dakota. I almost said San Diego because it says SD. Dominican Republic, lots of different people. Montreal, Quebec. So you've got a very global audience today, Elizabeth. Sounds to me like many people across the globe are interested to hear you talk about setting up and running hypothesis tests.
Awesome. Thanks for the warm introduction, Tracy. I'm sorry I can't see everybody, but thanks to those of you tuning in today, and thanks to those of you that are clearly staying up late. You guys are dialing in from all over the place. So As Tracy said earlier, we've both been with GoalingSixSigma.com since its inception. Our mission is to make it easy for you to build your problem-solving muscles. So that means that we simplify complex concepts. We make our training extremely practical, and I think it's really enjoyable. We provide a running case study at the Bahama Bistro. Our restaurant team applies all the tools. Aside from this webinar series, we put out blogs and podcasts and book reviews and lots of information to help you get where you need to go. And we've used and we've taught Lean Six Sigma for decades because it's got the best toolkit for problem solving. And thankfully, there's a growing list of companies who agree with us. So here's some organizations we've helped. You can see we've got bricks and mortar, online. There are diverse industries. You've got healthcare, financial services, manufacturing, government. And the reason these people are all interested is because Lean Six Sigma is about problem solving. And once you have an organization, you've got problems. So like all of you guys, these companies want to be the best at problem solving. So you're in good company. So more on benefits later, but first let's look at our agenda for the day. First up, what are hypothesis tests and why do we need them when we're in process improvement? When should we use them? And how do we set up and run them? And then at the end of this, we'll give you some sort of words of advice, what we've learned over time. And I want to preface this whole webinar by saying that these tools come to us from the scientific community. So there's a lot more to it than a 45-minute webinar. There's a lot of depth here. We're going to keep it at a digestible level, right? Because our purpose is to get you comfortable with hypothesis tests and encourage you to use them when they're appropriate. There are a lot of different ways to prove things, and hypothesis tests are one way that you can use to determine whether your theory is correct or whether your improvements made a difference. And you want to always show the evidence you have to prove that you made a difference. You could remove 10 steps from a process that has 20 steps, and you can say, I changed it. Look, it was 20 steps, now it's 10. But some things aren't that obvious, and that's why we're going to delve into hypothesis testing today. So what are they? A hypothesis is a guess, but it's an educated guess, right? We generally start with a process. We start a process improvement project with some ideas about what's happening in the process. And then as we conduct process walks, we map the processes, we collect the data, our ideas turn into hypotheses because we're educated about the process now. We have what we call profound knowledge, or we're building that. And hypothesis tests are a formal way to test those educated guesses. So let's go to some samples. So what can you test? All right, so there's a drug out there called Prevagen, and their makers claim that it supports healthy brain function, gives you sharper mind, clearer thinking. They say it's clinically proven to work. It's a big seller with the elderly. So that's one thing we could test. Another one is Swiffer. At one point they claimed they were 3 times more effective than a broom. Poor little brooms. But anyway, the other one we've got here is Skechers. I don't know if you remember this. They claim that sneakers helped you lose weight and also improve your muscle tone. And they had a lot of celebrity endorsements. That was a big one. So those are things we could test. And what we're asking, the general question we're asking is there a difference? So for Prevagen, is there a difference from placebos, right? That's what you want to test. Is there any difference? And the lawsuit that eventually came up against these guys says that the marketers were relying, the study the marketers were relying on showed no difference in memory function between the group that used Prevagen and the group that was given placebos. And that decision came from the Federal Trade Commission and the New York State Attorney General, and they're seeking refunds and a halt in advertising. So that test resulted in a change there. Next one was Swiffers. Are they really different from brooms? Libman Broom Company, you might not have heard of them. They complained that the test did not support Procter & Gamble's claims. And the National Advertising Division of the Better Business Bureau agreed. So they had to stop saying that. And then we've got our Skechers. Are they really different from sneakers? Do they really make you lose weight and give you better muscle tone? Well, the claims were based on an independent clinical study conducted by a single chiropractor, and a federal judge said the study did not show a difference, and they settled a $40 million claim against the company. Everybody got compensated for their sneakers. And it turns out that chiropractor was married to a Skechers ad executive, and they kind of failed to disclose that. So that didn't end well. So that's one of our questions here is there a difference?
That is scandalous.
Say it again?
That is scandalous.
It is scandalous, isn't it? It's funny once you start researching things, like, I had no idea. All right. There's also a study that says the more wine you drink, the higher your good cholesterol goes, right? Another study showed that as a person's education increased, the more education you got, the higher your life expectancy was. This was a joint study. It showed that in actuality, just getting a high school diploma increased life expectancy. So these both turned out to be true. So there's two types of tests. One, is there a difference? Right? We just looked at a few of those, but back to our process improvement world, if you have in the Bahama Bistro 2 cooks that were cooking at different speeds, you could test, is there really a difference between the new cooks and the experienced prep cooks? And the other one you can do is correlation, right? There was the more you drank wine, the better your cholesterol was. Of course, if you drank too much, then it started to go down again. But then the other one was the more education you got, the more life expectancy you had. So those were correlations. As X changes, Y changes too. So you always your ears perk up when you hear studies show, right? They're running tests. And I love the studies that show that wine makes you healthy and coffee makes you smarter. Those are good.
I'll drink to that, both of them.
So this example is coming to you from the Bahama Bistro, and we're measuring customer satisfaction, right? What drives customer satisfaction? And there's a lot of factors, right? The speed of service, the time it takes customers to serve you, menu item availability, food freshness, order accuracy, ambiance. And what these are is these are different potential X's, right? We're going to start getting into this pseudo math world where the customer satisfaction, the measurement of how satisfied a customer is the Y. That's our output measure. And then the X's are all variables that could drive customer satisfaction up or down. In this case, if we wanted to improve customer satisfaction, we determine which of these is critical. We might test if customer satisfaction is different with overhead lighting versus candlelight, or if the faster the service, the happier the guests. These are examples of why we run tests in process improvement. We want to understand the critical X. Now, this, I don't know if you remember this equation. It's usually part of process improvement training. It's not really math. It kind of looks like algebra, but it's important. And it's saying just what we looked at. It's saying any Y, right, customer satisfaction, cycle time, defect rate, any output is a function of all these critical X's, X1, X2, X3. And our job is to figure out what's the critical X, or critical X's. There's often more than one, but what makes the biggest difference in terms of moving that Y up or down, you know, in terms of what the process improvement project is trying to do. So there's two main areas in DMAIC where we run the tests, the analyze phase and the improve phase. And the root cause in the analyze phase, we're trying to determine the root cause, and that's what we're going to focus on today. We're going to look at testing to understand root cause. So when you're improving projects, you're deciding where to spend your time, where to focus data collection, where to put your valuable resources. If you fix the wrong thing, it's expensive in time, dollars, and also project momentum. People get discouraged if they go after the wrong thing, and it doesn't really make any difference. And then in improvements, it's key. You want to show people that you made a difference, right? You did all this work. Did it change the why? Did it really drive customer satisfaction up? You have to show a difference between the baseline. When you started this project, what was the level of the project Y, whether it's customer satisfaction or defects, and then you have to show that the difference is statistically significant. It's not just random common variation, but you really made a difference. And that's the two areas you have tests. We're going to focus on the analyze phase version, which is determining root cause. So now we're going to go to a poll. So this is our first one, just to get a feeling for how our subscriber audience has used polls, how you guys have used them, or whether you've used them. So let's launch a poll now and go to Sense.
I have a quick story for you too while people are polling.
Awesome. So this is how have you used hypothesis tests. All right, so I'm going to launch that. So go ahead. And Tracy, what's your story?
So I came in and I was helping a project group on finding the root cause to something. And I kept asking them, what do you guys think the root cause is? What do you guys think? We were brainstorming root causes, right? And it got really quiet. And then someone said, well, we think it's Chris Mobley. Yeah, everybody started nodding their heads. Yeah, it's Chris Mobley. It's Chris Mobley. And I'm like, whoa, okay. And I said, okay, well, let's put it down as a hypothesis. And so they're like, yeah, he's the one. He's always the problem, blah, blah, blah. They're totally like blaming him. Well, come to find out, when we actually tried to prove, let's say, okay, let's try to prove that. We collected data from this person's area. It turned out to be not him or his area. And I said, I'm sorry, guys, the data doesn't show that he's the root cause or his group. And they were mad. But you know what's even funnier is 3 weeks later, I got a call from Chris Mobley. And he's like, I heard you got my back. I go, look, I don't have your back. The data just didn't show that you were the problem or you were the root cause.
That's hilarious.
Isn't that funny?
I think we've got a good 80% on this one.
Okay, so this one says I haven't tried to use one yet, 47%. So it sounds to me like a lot of people that are on this webinar have never used one before. So that's interesting. And then that's shortly followed by 27% say that they've used it to verify that the solution made a difference, followed by to verify a root cause, and last but not least, to test the guarantee made by a vendor.
Huh. Fascinating. I was wondering if anyone did that, because that's really the least common, but it's kind of a split between checking if your solution made the difference and verifying root cause. That's great. Okay. And then glad to have those of you that have never tried it before. Hopefully this encourages you to give it a shot. All right. Thank you, Tracy.
Mm-hmm.
So the testing process starts with a practical problem. And from there, we turn it into a statistical problem, right? So we go from English into math. This comes from the scientific community. There are rules and regulations to follow. And I know that those of you that just saw the word statistics or heard me say it, I might have lost you, but hang in there, because we're going to take it into statistics, and we're going to come back out and make sure that it's grounded in the real world impacts. So first practical, then statistical, then we're going to do our analysis. We come back to a statistical conclusion, which leads us into a practical conclusion, right? We're going to go in and then come back out. So now we have our general hypothesis. So we want to know what's the problem, what type of data are we looking at, and then a statistic refers to the measure. So that could be average or the median or standard deviation, right? So there's a few measurements we can look at, but we start with stating what we're trying to figure out. So let's go back to the Bahama Bistro. And the team at the Bahama Bistro is making an educated guess. They're not sure if what seems like a real difference is just common fluctuation in sales, right? They said the problem is we can't keep up with the hot sauce demand. 16% of the time, customers cannot get the hot sauce they want. So the general hypothesis is that the average hot sauce sales are higher at the downtown location, and that's causing hot sauce stockouts, right? So that's their general hypothesis. And now we have to look at our data, and that's money, and that's continuous data, continuous or variable data. And if we have continuous data, right, and continuous data, for just a quick reminder, that's cycle time, weight, volume, things like that, as opposed to proportion defective, right? So we're looking at continuous data, and we want to know, is it normally distributed, right? So let's take a look at what's that about. If it's continuous, is it normal? So this comes back to the bell curve. Most of you have been exposed to this normal distribution, which is called a bell curve. And our data could be normal, or it could be slanted or skewed to one side. It could have two bell curves, which is also called bimodal. But we just need to run a quick test to determine if the data is normally distributed. So the test is called Anderson-Darling. It's the Anderson-Darling test, which sounds more like dialogue in a TV drama, but it does the trick. This is an easy test. It means highlighting each column of continuous data that you're planning to use. Then you select the Anderson-Darling test for normality. It's not bad if it's not normal. It impacts the type of test you get to use. Instructions and practice data sets for this test, the normality test, and all the others are on the GoLean6sigma.com site for both Minitab and Sigma Excel. So if any of this is foreign and you're thinking, well, I don't know how to do that, so that's going to cause a problem. All of this is online, and you can get more in depth if you'd like. So the next thing we're going to discuss is this idea of a p-value, right? It says it's not normal if the p-value is less than 0.05. So we'll touch on that again. But let's go look at our data sets right now. So there's one of our data sets. That's the downtown sales. So I've run the test, and it looks at 200 different days of sales. And there's all this information. If you look at the very bottom, it says there's the Anderson-Darling, and there's the p-value, right? And let's go to the next one. All right, so that one is not under 0.05. Now let's look at the beachfront sales, same thing. And we look down there and we see, once again, p-value is not under 0.05. So both of these are normal data sets.
So Elizabeth, can I just recap really quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
So you're saying if anyone out there has continuous data, you want to check to see if the data is normal, follows a normal distribution, because that helps determine which test you would be running. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. So now we know that. We know these, and we can even see it, right? The bell curves right there. These look normal. They tested normal. So they're normal, and that means that's going to come into play when we choose our test. So next up, we're going to move away from English into math, right? Formal hypothesis tests require us to come up with formal hypothesis statements in order to run the test. So it says, in this case, what is the null hypothesis and what is the alternative hypothesis? These are the two statements we have to come up with to run the test. Now, why? Right? You're thinking, I have a hypothesis. What's up with this null and alternative? Why do I have to have these two tests? Why do you need them both? So let's take a step back and say, what if your theory is that all swans are white? How do we prove it? Because I want to prove that all swans are white. I cannot get all the swans together in one place. But if we find one black swan, then we can prove our theory is false. So we use falsification. We set up the null, and then we try to disprove it. And that's the position we're always in. We take our theory, that's the alternative, and then we pair it with a null, saying there's no difference, right? Alternative, there's a difference. Null, there's no difference. And then we try to prove that null false. So that's where we're starting from, is this idea of falsification. All right, so here, the null and alternative appear as H sub O and H sub A, right? Null, 0, and then H sub A, or null is the letter O. So the way to remember this is H sub O, ho-hum, no difference. Or H sub A, aha, there's a difference, right? So the null, nothing's going on, nothing to see here, keep moving. The alternative, there's something going on. I get to pursue my theory. right? If you try to reject the null, if you can, then you can pursue the alternative. And that's the way to remember them. We've got a few little memory games here that are always helpful when you're dealing with the realm of statistics. Okay, so now let's talk about our formal hypothesis statements for the Bahama Bistro. So they built the null. They said the null is there's no difference between the average hot sauce sales at the downtown location and the beachfront location. And then you've got these little Greek letters, we pronounce it mu, it just means average, and it says average 1 equals average 2, right? Downtown sales equals beachfront sales, no difference. Ho-hum. Alternative. The average hot sauce sales at the downtown location are not equal to the average sales at the beachfront location. Mu not equal to mu 2. There's something going on. They're not different. Aha. So we're looking, our job is to falsify and disprove that null so we can pursue this alternative.
Nice.
Any questions, Tracy?
I was just going to say the one I always think about is the one that we use in our judicial system, which is there's two choices. They're either guilty or not guilty, and that's a null and that's an alternate hypothesis, right? The alternate, I guess, is guilty, and then the null is not guilty. So I think it's really interesting. It's very similar to what you were talking about with the swans, right? If you can't prove guilt, it doesn't mean they're innocent. It just means they're not guilty.
Innocent until proven guilty, right? They're null. They're just like everybody else until you disprove that. Cool. I like that.
Thank you.
All right. So analysis. Now we got to select the test, get the data, perform the test. Now for that, we've got this handy hypothesis tree, hypothesis testing tree. Then let's follow the lines here. So what type of data? The first thing we ask, and we said it was money. Looking at sales, and that is continuous. I can continually divide money, it still makes sense. That's continuous. Now, are you testing for correlation? As sales go up, something else goes up? No. We are not testing for correlation. Well, then, is the data normal? Yes. It passed the Anderson normality test, and now we go to the type of statistic, and we said we're looking at average sales downtown versus average sales in the beachfront. So that takes us down here, and we have two sets of data. We've got beachfront and downtown, so 2 sample T. And that's what you do. You've got a test you can look at. You've got this tree to follow the logic to find the test that's for you. And you can see on the left there's only there's fewer discrete tests, continuous or divided up. You've got correlation, then you've got normal, non-normal. But we're going to focus on this one test today. It's a very common test to use. And let's see, let's get some more information from you guys. So those of you that are testing, and some of you I'm sure are going to say, you don't know yet, but these are the questions for you. Are you comparing 2 or more defect rates? Is this discrete data, proportion defective? Or are you comparing 2 or more cycle times? That's a very common thing to look at in process improvement. Are you checking if 2 things correlate as X increases, Y increases? Or are you doing something else? Because there are other things to test. Or you're not sure yet. So let me launch the poll and then let you guys, and that is, what are you testing? Here you go.
So I probably have a story here too.
Go Tracy, I love your stories.
So while everybody's taking the poll, why not? So my favorite kinds of these, project stories is when they think they are almost positive that the root cause is something, and then they go and collect the data and it actually shows that it's not the root cause. And I just love these stories because it just validates that the process works. And, I've seen companies save hundreds of thousands of dollars because they were going to implement something for what they thought was the root cause, and then they discover in this process that it wasn't.
Yeah.
So, and I'll just say really quickly that this one company I was working with was going to buy credit card machines for all their trucks, like 70 trucks, because they thought that the problem that was the main root cause of incomplete deliveries because people weren't paying. And when we collected the data, that was one of the lowest reasons why there were incomplete deliveries. So they would have spent all this money on credit card machines for truck drivers when it wasn't going to solve the problem.
Yeah. So they used it to bust that assumption, which is great.
Yep, they busted an assumption.
So let's close this and share.
Okay. So 33% say they're not sure yet how they would be using this in terms of what they're going to be testing. 27% said comparing 2 or more cycle times, which is obviously very, very, very common. 21% were checking to see if 2 things correlate. 16% comparing 2 or more defect rates, and 3% are other.
Very cool. So a lot of you, 27% of you, might even be using the 2-sample T, right? If you've got some normal data, but then some of you are going to use regression, which is always fun. It's another scary word, but it's a good test. Yeah. And that's great, and fair enough. You guys are trying to get a feel for what test you would use.
Yes. And I would just say, too, for those that are not sure yet, I mean, I know some people say, well, I've gotten this far in my life without any hypothesis testing, right? You know, so it could be scary, but again, when the stakes are high and people are dying because a process isn't working, I mean, those are, you know, or you really need to be statistically sure that there is an improvement, like these companies. Yeah. That's when, you know, this is really important to do the testing. So you might have not, it doesn't apply for everything, and it's not necessarily needed for everything, but it is important to know when you need it.
It's really true. And Tracy, because they're on the webinar today, every single one of them is going to run a hypothesis test afterwards. I can feel it. Okay, thank you guys for taking the poll. So next, you're going to gather the data, and all we need are columns B and C, right? There's a total, there's a date, and this data set is online. You can play with this yourself. We just need the downtown sales and the beachfront sales. And the next thing we're going to do, we're going to run the test. So we provide instructions for whether you're going to use Minitab, which works on a PC, or whether you're going to use Sigma Excel, which works on a PC and a Mac. Now, I have a Mac, so I'm going to use Sigma Excel for this one, but we have instructions for both. And I am going to bring us over to our data set. So here's our data sets. And as I mentioned, I'm going to capture downtown and beachfront. And there's a little shortcut where if I hit Command, let's do these. I do Shift over here, Command down arrow. Let's see, Shift, down. Oh, there it goes. Then it captures all, I think it's 201 rows of data. Let me just make sure I did that right. So 1, Shift over, down. Okay, there I got 201. So then I'm going to go up to Sigma Excel, and I'm coming down to Statistical Tools. Those of you that have this in different software packages, different ways to get there, but basically you're looking for where the stat tools are, and then you're coming over here and you see, if I look at descriptive statistics, I'm going to come all the way down to a 2-sample T. All right, so that's what we agreed to do, a 2-sample T. And then I'm going to hit next. My data is unstacked. So I'm going to hit both variables. Okay. And let's come back so we can see that in a larger format. Okay. So there's our data.
Very nice.
So let's review these results, Tracy. We have the 2 hypotheses up front. There's the H sub O, the null, saying the mean difference is 0. And then the H sub A, the mean difference is not equal to 0.
Mm-hmm.
All right? They're different. So we look at the count. We know that there was 200 days of sales from each location. It says the mean displays the average sales for the downtown versus beachfront. But we're most interested in this p-value that is highlighted in red for us. So let's figure out what that means. And that is this phase of the process, which is the statistical conclusion. This is where we interpret the p-value and we accept or reject the null. All right, let's come back to this p-value. Now we've seen it with the Anderson-Darling. It's going to appear on all these hypothesis tests. So what is it? And P stands for probability. It can be between 0 and 1. And there's a lot of nuance to this, but I'm going to make it simple for you. It boils down to the probability of the null hypothesis being true. So high p-values, if there's something as high as 0.84, remember it's between 0 and 1. If it's 0.84, then there is very little reason to doubt the null. There's really no difference. If there's low p-values, like if p equals 0.015, something as low as that, right? It could be all the way to 0, then there's very little probability the null hypothesis is true, so you have to reject it. And let me give you a fun little saying. Tracy and I use it all the time. If the p is low, right, the null must go. But if the p is high, the null can fly. So if the p is low, and low is less than 0.05, then you can reject it. But if the p is high, then you cannot reject it, right? The null gets to stay in place.
So is that why the null is sad in this picture, because he's been rejected?
In this case, Tracy, yes, he's very sad. He has to go away. Okay. So now we got another mini quiz for you. Were you listening when I told you how the p-value worked? So I'm going to launch this, and I'm going to test whether you guys know when to reject the null. This is your first practice. Go ahead and choose which of these in which case would you reject the null? Oh, these people are good.
Yeah, I could tell. I don't
Remember, if the p is low, the null must go. It's between 1 and 0, and anything lower than 0.05 is officially low. All right, so let's close this and see what we got. All right, so this takes a little getting used to, but looks like 88% were thinking 0.045, which is under 0.05, right, less than, then that would be a case where you'd reject the null, and you're right. So we'll get some more practice with this, but that's really how it works. That's what you're looking for.
Nice.
Yeah.
Looks like people are paying attention, Elizabeth.
I think they were 88%.
88% got it right.
Okay, let's talk about something else you're going to see, and that's something called a confidence level. And the flip side of that is risk. There's confidence and risk. And you saw it in the test. You may have noticed it said 95% confidence. And that says, literally the translation is, I am 95% confident that the inferences I'm making based on testing these samples are correct. I'm 95% confident. And that means there's a 5% risk I am wrong. So I may see a difference. I may say, hey, downtown's different from the beachfront, and really it's not, because there's a 5% chance I'm wrong. So if you're wrong, you might reject the null when there really is no difference. It's possible, because we're working with samples. But the great news about this is standard, right? We're not, unless you're working with medical devices or on a NASA space shuttle, the process improvement projects, the understood standard is 95% confidence. It's going to be a default in all the tests you use, and you can leave it. So trust me on that, and leave that, and focus on the p-value. So the p is low, the null must go. We can reject the null, right? It's less than 0.05, it's 0. It didn't even register. It's too small to show up on in the space allotted here. So that means downtown has statistically significant different sales from beachfront. And that means we get to now take this back into a practical conclusion, right? So what is the practical conclusion? Since we statistically rejected the null, that means location is a significant X, right? We were trying to understand what's driving these, all the times that customers don't get the hot sauce they want. And we said, you know what? Location's a significant X. And that X is downtown having a higher rate of sales. And so now they're going to have to take that into consideration when they do production, when they do stocking. They were ignoring it. They didn't recognize the difference, and now they're going to recognize the difference and basically build their process and forecast accordingly. So that's our practical conclusion. And once you've done that, then you go to your hypothesis testing plan. So you've always got a plan. You're always listing what the possible X is. In this case, it's location. Your hypothesis is there. You know, your general hypothesis, average hot sales are higher at the downtown location than the beachfront. What's the test we use? 2-sample T. And what's the result is true, right? They're different. So now that we've updated that, and we always update that, then we come back and let's just think about verifying results in general. So teams often neglect to conduct hypothesis tests, which can lead to, as Tracy was describing, you know, wasted time, misplaced resources. People get frustrated, and people fix things where it wasn't the problem, as she, you know, gave you an example. So, you know, have you made improvements that didn't help? Here's an example of not testing assumptions. So there was a project I was involved with. It was reducing costs at a hotel chain restaurant, or just in general. There's a lot of, we're working with a hotel chain, so it was all their on-site restaurants. And they were basing their staffing model on the occupancy rate. So they could see how many people had booked at the hotel, and they had part-time and on-call staff, and they staffed the restaurant based on how many people had registered to stay at the hotel, which made perfect sense. They assumed there was a correlation, right? As the number of guests increased, the number of meals consumed would go up. But since they often found their staffing, they were over or understaffed, mainly overstaffed, which was causing the high cost of the restaurant. When they did the actual correlation, they didn't find any. There was no relationship between the check-in rate and the number of meals consumed. But if they took out both dinner and lunch, they did find a correlation. There was a correlation of breakfast. Breakfast meals consumed, that was impacted by the occupancy rate of the hotel, which makes sense, right? You're at a hotel, you might likely have breakfast there, but then you're off. You might be at a conference, you might be at meetings, you might be off-site. You know, lots of places to choose from. That really changed their staffing model. Another example, recently I was working with a black belt who was sure that her improvements had increased revenue, right? She showed me. She said, look, I did the improvements and see the revenue has gone up. And I was like, well, there's some seasonal cycles to this, right? And she said, oh yeah, absolutely. I said, well, let's look at last year. And actually, it looked exactly the same as last year. It really hadn't made a difference. So she had to go back and implement more improvements, right? There was no verification there. And Tracy, you had a great example. I think you were working, it was financial services.
Yeah, and I think the example that I would like to share is kind of the opposite. It's people actually didn't think they had made a significant impact when they actually did. So I think a lot of people are very comfortable using percentages, right? Like, oh, we have X% improvement over, you know, last year, or over this, you know, improvement in cycle time, whatever it is. And so we're very comfortable understanding percentages. And in this case, they were working to reduce what we call undeliverable mail, so mail that never gets it to the recipients and cannot find these people. And we're talking financial business, we're talking money, we're talking about trying to find these people. And then if you eventually cannot find these people, all that money gets turned over to the state. So they're trying to reduce undeliverable mail, and they did the improvement project, and when they measured it initially, there was only a 1% improvement,
Mm.
and the team got completely discouraged. They had done so much work on this project, and they thought, we only have a 1%. That's not even significant. It can't be. And I said, well, I think you should run the test anyways, just to see. And they ran the test for statistical significance, which tells us it's not just due to random chance, that there was a statistically significant change. And it came out as reject the null, meaning this is a statistically significant difference in what has happened. And when you think about it, 1% was hundreds of thousands of mail now being delivered. But when you look at a percentage, it was only 1%. So it doesn't sound like they made a huge impact, but they really did. So the team went from discouraged to very happy because they really did want to make an improvement. And when you just looked at improvement percentages, it wasn't registering.
Yeah, that's a great example. I love that on the flip side, that doubting yourself and finding out.
They won an award from the Postal Service because
Really?
the Postal Service was like, thank you.
That was great. That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tracy. That was a great one. So let's do a little check on you guys. I would like to find out if you have ever, and then go ahead and let us know if you ever, if you have personal experience of what Tracy and I are describing. Address the root cause. It was not a critical X. Fixed a process that saw no positive results. Looked on as others based fixes on assumptions, or experienced some combination, or none of that's familiar, right? So any of this, and any combination of this, because those of you have been in the process improvement for a while, you're probably thinking, I've seen it all. So we just want to hear what you guys came up with.
Looks like you're getting some good votes there.
We are. Okay, so I'm going to close and launch, and let's see what we've got.
So 50% say that there's a combination of some of the above. So let me cover those first. 50% said looked on, right? So making assumptions when they shouldn't have. Fixed process that saw no results, 10%. I saw that a lot. That was the one that got my vote, is seeing improvements implemented that had no effect on the problem. Like, okay, that was a waste of time. And then the last one, 8%, addressing a root cause that was not a critical X. So those were the pieces that were a combination of something. And then 17% said they've experienced none of the above, but maybe you just weren't thinking about an example. But, a lot of times when I ask people, how many of you have seen solutions implemented that didn't solve the problem? Like the whole class raises their hand.
Yeah, a common experience. Well, thank you guys. Thank you for chiming in on that. That's good to hear and good to see your experiences, and that these are common problems, which begs the question, was there an opportunity for a hypothesis test? Could that have spared some of the wasted time or effort? Okay. So why use tests? You've got root cause. You're looking at, are defects higher one place than another? I can investigate. Are a high proportion of late shipments coming from a particular supplier? I can investigate, or switch suppliers. Are the portion of weights the same across all meals? Could lead to mistake proofing solutions like standard scoops, things like that. Verifying standards, we asked this earlier. If somebody is promising you a certain delivery time and advertising, and it's part of your contract, you can test, are they really doing it? And if they're not, you could renegotiate. Or verifying solutions. Did the changes reduce defects, cycle time, confirm and spread the news, build trust, it builds confidence, and it builds momentum. These are really helpful. So words of advice: clarify the practical problem you're addressing before turning it into a formal hypothesis statement. Use the decision tree. Very easy. You can think about what kind of data you have, how many strata you're looking at, data sets. Spend time setting up your null and alternative. Check it with other people, making sure it's no difference versus difference. Remember, you're looking for difference and or correlation, right? Difference between different people, different places, different units, different times, before and after, things like that. Correlation, as X changes, the Y changes, right? Either up or down. P-value is your guide. If the P is low, the null must go. And hypothesis tests are helpful when determining potential for root cause. They can also prove your solutions made a difference. So we talked about what are they, we talked about why you need them, when you should use them, how to set them up and run one. We just did one, but it's pretty much a similar process for all of them. And those are, we just gave you a little sort of primer on how to go through this and what works and what to watch out for. And that brings us to Q&A. We're going to have a short time for Q&A, but we promise you whatever questions you type in, and please start typing in your questions now. We're going to come back to them after we give you some other info of upcoming events. If we don't answer them today, which a lot of them will not be answered, then we're going to answer them online and we're going to post them for you. So you will see an answer to every question you give us. All right? And the other thing I want to let you know about is you can learn more about hypothesis testing by signing up for black belt training and certification. You can get lots more training. There's this webinar is just the start of your journey. You've got lots of other topics you could look at. So learn more about Lean Six Sigma tools and concepts with more training. Tracy, there's another webinar coming up. Do you want to tell them what that's about?
Absolutely. We're going to be talking about Introduction to Lean. So very basic, introductory, very quick webinar about what Lean is, why people use it, what it's for. It's great if, you know, there's lots of people actually that's still in this world that don't know what Lean and Six Sigma are, and it can be helpful to understand that. So it's a basic webinar, but I find that it's great for especially even leaders who don't really understand what it is, and they're not necessarily behind implementing it at their organization. So it can help if you end up having a leader or even an employee or coworker that wants to learn more about Lean, forward them this and see if they want to attend.
Yeah, that's a good primer. Thank you, Tracy. There's also, we've got a podcast. You want to tell us a little bit about Richard Barron?
Yeah, so Richard Barron actually works for Coconino County in Arizona. He's a government employee. And it was really interesting talking with him about what he does for Coconino County. And if you didn't know, Coconino County has the Grand Canyon in it. So from a landmass perspective, one of the largest counties in the United States. So and the nice thing is he wrote a book. Richard Barron wrote a book called Streamline: Your Path to Government Efficiency Starts Here. And he talks a little bit about his book. It's a fable and really interesting book. And so we get to hear him talk about what he likes about his book and what he likes about process improvement.
And this, just for those of you that have never tuned into the Just-in-Time Cafe podcast, we also talk about success stories we've seen. We also give you the latest apps that help out and the latest books out on Lean Six Sigma. In this case, it's Richard Barron's book, and then we do an interview with somebody, a notable in the Lean Six Sigma world. And that brings us back to the Q&A. So Tracy, we only have a short time available, but let's get a few questions in.
Okay, good. There are a few questions. So one of them is, there are other tools in Analyze, like the 5 Whys and the Ishikawa diagram. Are these methods also for verifying root cause?
That's a great question. And they are, to my mind, some of the best tools you could possibly use in a process improvement project. But they are basically structured brainstorming. So you have a root cause analysis is saying, what could be causing the problem? You know, if the problem is that we are basically running out of hot sauce, what could be the problem? And someone may have said, you know what, I think the problem is I think downtown is selling more than we think they are. And we're having stockouts because we're not accommodating that issue. Then you'd have to go collect data and test it, right? Same with the 5 Whys, which is a great companion tool for the fishbone, where you take something like that, take a symptom that might come up in the brainstorming on the root cause diagram, and then ask 5 Whys to get down to root cause. Again, that's brainstorming. It's what the group thinks is going on. You still have to go either get data and test it, or go verify the process by looking at it. There's lots of different ways to do verification, but those are a first step. The testing would be the verification step.
Great, thank you. So another question, average sales comparison seems simple. Setting up a hypothesis test seems an unnecessarily complex approach to arrive at the answer. No?
It depends. It may be really obvious, right? It may be that you've got something, it's the sales at one place are, 50% higher than the sales at the other. I don't need a test. I can see. It's really obvious. These are when it's tough to tell and you need to be sure. So we tried to keep it a simple example, and in that case, would we have needed it if it was in your process? Maybe not. We're trying to keep it simple so that we could give you a good example. But there are other cases where, as in Tracy described it, it's not immediately obvious. 1% doesn't sound great, doesn't sound big, but it turns out to have been a statistically significant difference. So it depends. It's when you need that extra proof, when it would cost you a lot of money in time and resources and momentum if you made the wrong choice.
Thank you. Very good. This question is the two-sample T used because you have two samples? And in parentheses, they say locations.
Yeah, that's a good point. If we had 3 different locations, it would go to the next test on the tree, and that would have been ANOVA, or analysis of variance. We could have 2 or more strata. In this case, as you point out, it's locations. But since we only had 2, we could use the two-sample T.
Okay, we do have a few questions about statistical programs that are available. Which ones are better to use? Minitab, QI Macros, Sigma Excel, SPC Excel. They're asking for advice, I think.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. There's a lot out there, as you just listed some of the kind of the top vote getters. And honestly, I used to use Minitab all the time, but that's when I had a PC. And it's also when somebody else was paying the bill, because Minitab costs a lot more than Sigma Excel. I have a Mac now, so I have reduced options. I could use QI Macros, and I do, Sigma Excel. So those are the ones I'm most familiar with, and they're all good. They all do the job. I think you mentioned another one that I've also used, SPC Excel. Anyway, I've never had a bad experience with a stat package. It really comes down to what you get used to, and it's also a matter of price. So they cost different amounts, and that often will drive. And so we tried to give kind of a Cadillac and then a one that was more affordable in terms of options for you guys.
Wonderful. And the last question is, I'm new to process improvement, but I'm very interested in becoming experienced with this. What is a practical way to get better at this?
New to process improvement.
Besides, of course, going through our training.
Yeah, well, actually, I would say go through the training, or go through one of the webinars that we've done that gives you the high-level view. You've got, Intro to Lean Six Sigma. You've got White Belt, that's a 1-hour training. You've got Yellow Belt, which is 8 hours and free. It's still free. I think it's awesome. So, and that's all self-paced. But I'd say take a look at what, there's also some blogs we've done giving you, go on the website and do a search on Lean Six Sigma or introduction, see what you come up with there, because there's so very many resources. But that's a really good question. There's a lot out there. All right, so I think that's tying it up for us today. As I said, any questions that did not get answered, we will answer those online and post them in the next day or so. And then thank you for joining us, everybody. It was a pleasure having you. Hope to see you at the next webinar. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.